In our era, when we talk so much about globalization and how technology is bringing the world closer together, it's easy to forget about similar situations in the past when people, products, and ideas spread between different parts of the world. In this video, we're going to focus on something in the past that helped the movement of goods and ideas a long time ago, the Silk Road. We're also going to talk about how Buddhism spread into China along the Silk Road, as well as the similarities and differences between Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. The basic time period that we're discussing today is about 150 BCE in the first several hundred years of the Common Era. In China, that overlaps with the Han Dynasty, and in the European context, it is the Roman Republic and then the Roman Empire. Even today, you can see elements of Dunhuang's importance as a key spot at the start of the Silk Road. The picture on the left shows the famous Crescent Spring that was a notable spot on the Silk Road in the Han Dynasty. Even today, you can see elements of Dunhuang's importance as a key spot at the start of the Silk Road. The picture on the left shows the famous Crescent Spring that was a notable spot on the Silk Road in the Han Dynasty. Moving one layer deeper, we want to think about what types of goods were transported along the Silk Road. As the name suggests, one Chinese product that was valued very highly in the Roman Empire was silk. Made from silkworms, the material provides unparalleled comfort. The citizens of Rome certainly thought so, and the material was coveted by many. Even just a pound of silk could sell in Rome for the equivalent of nearly $1 million. So great was the desire for Chinese silk in Rome that the Roman government tried to prevent citizens from wearing clothes made of the material. Spices, grapes, sesames, peas, onions, cucumber, silverware from Persia, and glassware from Syria went the other direction, to China. However, silks, spices, and other goods were not the only things to travel along the Silk Road. Ideas did as well. One of the most important functions of the Silk Road was aiding the spread of Buddhism into China. As you can see from the map, by following the red line, the main way that Buddhism spread from India to China was a northern route through the Silk Road. Travelers and merchants introduced it to Silk Road towns of Dunhuang, and from there it went to the rest of China. But we want to ask ourselves, what were the main beliefs of Buddhism? How did they complement or contradict other systems of belief in China, namely Confucianism and Taoism? What about Buddhism would appeal to people in China? In the rest of the video, we're going to discuss these questions. The main ideas about Buddhism were embodied by the Buddha, who was the first person to achieve enlightenment. He stressed the importance of the Four Noble Truths, which are as follows. 1. Life is suffering. 2. Suffering is caused by cravings and desires. 3. To rid life of suffering and to achieve release from the cycle of rebirth, one has to get rid of all these cravings and desires. 4. The way to get rid of these cravings and desires is to follow the Eightfold Path. Okay, so what does that actually mean? It sounds quite abstract, but it is actually quite logical. Basically, it starts out by identifying a problem, namely that life is a painful experience full of suffering that repeats itself as people are reincarnated. Then, it proceeds to identify a way of breaking this cycle by eliminating desires, cravings, and attachments in this world. The way to get rid of these emotions, cravings, and desires is to follow the Eightfold Path, which we'll talk about in a minute. For comparison, what do you think the problem, goal, and solution for Confucianism would look like? Why don't you pause the video and talk about this for a few minutes? Okay, for Confucianism, the problem, goal, and solution would probably look something like this. Confucianism identifies the problem as a society that has fallen from the golden age of the Zhou dynasty. The goal would be to find a way to recapture this former golden age, and the way to do it would be through study, proper behavior, and acting according to the 5 relationships. So as you can see, it's quite a bit different from Buddhism. The Eightfold Path is a way to structure your interactions with and attitudes towards the world. It is about how to behave and think so that you can more easily break out of the cycle of suffering. One way to follow the Eightfold Path is to become a Buddhist monk. With a knowledge of the basics of Buddhism in hand, what do you think are the factors within Chinese society that might help the spread of Buddhism? What factors in Chinese society might hinder the spread of Buddhism? There were a number of things that actually worked against the spread of Buddhism in China. Think back to what we said about Confucianism a few moments ago. Its goals are much different than the goals of Buddhism. Confucianism is a more worldly philosophy in that it is concerned about how to govern well, but Buddhism is more concerned with breaking the cycle of suffering. It is not really about politics. Confucian beliefs in the importance of worshiping and honoring ancestors opposed the Buddhist belief that when someone became a Buddhist monk, they had to remove themselves from the family lineage. From the Confucian point of view, this was a betrayal, in a sense disowning your own father and mother. Also, Confucians in the Chinese government elevated the status of peasants who worked in farming. However, Buddhist monks and monasteries did not contribute to society and instead lived off of society. They were unproductive. Finally, from a Taoist point of view, Buddha was simply Taoism in a lesser form. Taoists thought that the Buddha was actually a reincarnation of the Taoist philosopher Lao Tzu. Why, they thought, should we adopt Buddhist practices when Taoist ones were better? The important point here is that a number of factors worked against the spread of Buddhism in China. But a number of factors helped to support the spread of Buddhism in China. One was simply the work of individuals in translating Buddhist texts and sometimes performing what were thought to be remarkable feats. Another was that it had a lot of appeal to people in different sections of society because anyone, regardless of social status, could follow it. In a similar fashion, for a young Chinese woman who was about to be forced into an arranged marriage that she did not want to participate in, entering a Buddhist monastery might have been quite appealing. Finally, after the fall of the Han Dynasty, China experienced a period of disunity, and Buddhism's emphasis on kindness and charity could provide comfort and possible relief. Even though some people in China were opposed to Buddhism, it still grew in popularity. One thing to keep in mind is the relationship between Buddhism and the Chinese government. Certain emperors were very interested in and supportive of Buddhism. However, the Chinese government was in charge and could curtail or support Buddhism and Buddhist monasteries as it saw fit. As a contrast, this situation in China was much different from the relationship between the various governments in Europe and the Pope as the head of the Catholic Church. In Europe, the head of the Catholic Church was generally not subject to control by the heads of individual governments. So now, just to summarize the main points from today. First, the Silk Road is important for the spread of goods as well as the spread of ideas and beliefs, especially Buddhism. Next, even though it faced opposition from some elements of Chinese society, Buddhism grew in China but was under the control of the government. Finally, from China, Buddhism also spread into the Korean Peninsula and Japan, but the whole process started on the Silk Road.